If some breeds of dogs are smarter than others, why could that not be true for the animals at the other end of the leash? University of Delaware sociologist Linda Gottfredson has been analyzing IQ test scores for the past 2 decades. She claims they reveal a subtle but measurable link between intelligence, genetics, and race.
For very complex traits like intelligence, many genes of small effect may push a person this way or that. And they're really, really hard to find.
Individual IQs are as diverse as the grains of sand on a beach. But Linda believes there are patterns in this noise. Patterns that depend on our genes.
As any parent knows, brothers and sisters look different, they often have different personalities, and they often have different levels of intelligence. The average difference between siblings is 12 IQ points. If you compare to random people walking on the beach, you might ask, well, how different are those people? On the average, strangers differ by 17 IQ points. So you see that biological brothers and sisters are 2/3 as different on the average as random strangers on the street.
The genes of strangers vary more than those of siblings, and Linda argues this is why their IQs vary more. Her interpretation of this data has led her to a controversial notion that the genetic differences between races might lead to differences in the average intelligence of those races.
I guess there would be 2 rules about human diversity. One is that there's lots of variation within all groups, but there's also a gradation between groups, so that there are recurring and sometimes large average differences between racial ethnic groups.
IQ scores in any group of people are spread across a bell curve ranging from a score of about 70 to about 130. There are outliers on either end, but most people are clustered around an average.
There are differences between racial ethnic groups on the average in IQ. The average white's IQ is arbitrarily set at 100. Blacks in the United States and in many other Western countries average 85. Hispanics, the average would be about 80. Native Americans around that level. And then Japanese and Chinese Americans above the white average, and then Ashkenazi Jews probably around 110 and 115.
Linda's research has made her a scientific outcast. She's even been called a racist, a claim she denies. Her critics argue that IQ test results are heavily skewed by socioeconomic factors. Childhood nutrition and access to health care can vary widely between different racial groups. If you live in a good neighborhood with well-funded schools, you are more likely to be accustomed to the academic setting of an IQ test. And if you live in those neighborhoods, you are more likely to be Asian or white. There are also concerns over whether the test questions have a cultural bias, a bias reflected by the fact that it's the white IQ average that's set to 100. Is one race smarter than another? It depends on what you mean by smart. Could IQ scores predict the greatness of an artist like Picasso or of a political leader like Gandhi? IQ is a narrow obsession. No 2 people think the same way, regardless of their race. So here's a new question. If the brains of the races are similar now, will that always be true? We are still evolving. Could our brains one day become as different as those of border collies and beagles?